Okay, so, you sent us in this article, right? And it's from the Bible News and Worship Network, and it's got a pretty interesting title.
Oh, yeah.
Biblical Wisdom on Tariffs for America and Canada.
Interesting combination.
Yeah, it really is, actually. And on the surface, the Bible and trade policy, those seem like two totally separate worlds.
Yeah, first glance they do.
But that's what we're all about here on the Deep Dive.
Right.
Taking these deep dives, exploring, how this ancient wisdom might actually have some relevance, to these really complex modern issues.
Like tariffs.
Exactly. And in this case, tariffs between the U.S. and Canada.
Two of the biggest trading partners in the world.
Huge.
Yeah.
Yeah. So today, we're really going to unpack, what these tariffs mean, what their potential impact could be.
Yeah.
And we're also going to look at, the history of all this.
The historical context.
Through this unique lens.
Yeah, this biblical perspective.
Exactly. So we'll be looking at the news article that you were kind enough to send us.
Great article.
Yeah. And we'll also bring in some, historical trade data.
Yeah.
Just to give us that well-rounded view.
Absolutely. Having both those perspectives, a values-based perspective and the hard data, will give us a much richer understanding.
For sure. And, the article starts off with this analogy.
Okay.
That I think is so helpful in kind of grounding this whole discussion. Okay, so it talks about, Uncle Bob.
Uncle Bob.
And his, famous hot sauce at a family reunion.
Okay. Yeah, I can see where this is going.
Right. So imagine he's there, right? And everyone loves his hot sauce.
Of course, who doesn't love hot sauce?
Exactly. But then suddenly he decides, to drastically hike up the price, just to make a quick buck.
No, that doesn't seem very fair.
Exactly. And everyone would probably think, come on, Uncle Bob, what are you doing?
Yeah, that's not cool.
Right. And the article suggests that, the simple idea of fairness that we all kind of get on a personal level actually has echoes in the conversations that we have about tariffs between entire nations.
It's that same principle.
Exactly. It's not just about the economics, it's about what's right.
Yeah. And the impact on people.
For sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's kind of dive into this whole biblical framework for tariffs.
Okay, I'm ready.
What are some of the key ideas here that we should be thinking about?
Well, what's so fascinating to me is this notion that the Bible, this ancient text, actually offers insights into how nations should conduct their economic affairs.
Not just personal behavior.
Exactly right. It goes beyond that.
Wow.
And the article highlights this idea that, concepts of fairness and justice aren't just suggested.
Right.
They're presented as this fundamental part of what they call economic morality.
Okay, so it's like a moral obligation almost.
Exactly. It's about doing what's right in the economic sphere.
I see.
So when we look at tariffs through this lens, we're not just examining some financial tool.
Right.
We're considering, do these policies align with these broader ethical principles?
That's really interesting.
And, the Bible often talks about honest weights and measures in trade.
Oh, yeah, right? You wouldn't want to sell someone a short measure of grain, right?
Oh, no, that's not fair.
Exactly. And so, in a similar vein, tariffs could be seen as creating an imbalance.
Oh, okay.
If they unfairly disadvantage one trading partner over another.
Makes sense.
It's about ensuring that level playing field.
Now, the article brings in a specific verse from Proverbs.
Okay.
It's Proverbs 11.1.
A powerful verse.
It says, "A false balance is an abomination to the Lord, but a just weight is his delight."
Wow, so powerful when you think about it in the context of trade.
Right, and it really emphasizes that this idea of honesty and fairness needs to extend beyond our local interactions.
It's global.
Yeah, to these much larger economic relationships between countries.
Oh, yeah.
So could a tariff in certain situations actually be seen as creating that false balance?
Absolutely. Imagine a tariff that is so high it basically blocks imports from one country.
Okay.
Not because their goods are inferior, but just to protect a less efficient domestic industry.
I see.
Some would argue that this creates an artificial imbalance.
Yeah, shielding one producer at the expense of consumers who might end up having to pay more for those goods.
And it hurts the exporting nation as well.
Exactly, and that's where the idea of a just weight comes in.
Okay.
Policies should be equitable. They should be fair and not unfairly favor one party over another in the long run.
Right. It has to be a win-win, ideally.
This biblical lens really encourages us to think about trade as something that should lead to mutual benefit.
Not just the advantage of one side.
Exactly.
Now let's maybe shift gears a little bit and look at the historical backdrop of trade between the U.S. and Canada.
Okay.
This isn't a new relationship, obviously.
Not at all. The economic ties between the U.S. and Canada go way back.
Way back.
Even before they were fully formed nations.
Wow.
And over time, this has evolved into this deeply interconnected system, marked by periods of closer cooperation through various trade agreements.
Right.
Think of it as this long-term partnership with its share of adjustments along the way.
Ups and downs.
Exactly.
Now, the article mentions some really significant milestones.
Yeah.
Like NAFTA in 1994.
Huge turning point.
Yeah, which really changed the whole landscape of trade between the two countries.
It made things so much more integrated.
Exactly. And then more recently, the update to that agreement with USMCA in 2020.
Right.
These weren't just minor tweaks.
Not at all.
These agreements had a huge impact on how much trade actually happens between us.
Yeah. NAFTA and USMCA essentially lowered barriers to trade, right?
Okay.
Making it easier for goods and services to just flow across that border.
And the result is a massive amount of trade.
Huge volume.
The article mentions that by 2020, it was $615 billion worth of goods and services
Wow.
exchanged between the U.S. and Canada.
Just imagine a constant stream of trucks and trains crossing the border every single day, filled with everything you can imagine.
It's mind-boggling.
From car parts to energy resources, you name it.
Yeah. And when you look at what's typically traded, it seems like it's actually quite complementary.
Oh, for sure.
You know, Canada has a lot of natural resources, oil, natural gas, timber, things like that. Yeah, which the U.S. needs.
Exactly. And then in turn, the U.S. exports a lot of technology and manufactured goods to Canada.
Right.
It's almost like we're each supplying different pieces of this larger economic puzzle.
I like that analogy.
So when tariffs get introduced, it's like throwing a wrench in that whole system.
Yeah, it disrupts that flow.
Exactly. And the article uses another analogy to illustrate the impact of tariffs on local economies.
Oh, really? What's that?
It compares them to like an annoying friend who crashes your party and eats all the snacks.
Okay, I like that one too.
Right. It's a way of saying that tariffs bring hidden costs that can really disrupt things.
Right, because it's not just a tax paid at the border, right?
Exactly. Those costs often get passed on to consumers in the form of higher prices.
Right. If a Canadian company that makes furniture, for example, relies on American steel,
Okay.
and suddenly that steel becomes more expensive because of a tariff,
Yeah.
they're going to have to charge more for their couches.
And then the consumer ends up paying more.
And that leads to people being more cautious with their spending.
Right.
And if businesses see less demand, well, that can lead to job insecurity.
Unfortunately, yeah, and that impact can be felt very differently in different regions.
That's true.
The article mentions concerns specifically from the Canadian Chamber of Commerce in Calgary.
Okay.
Given their strong energy sector, which is so closely linked to the U.S. market,
Right, yeah.
tariffs on oil and gas can have this significant ripple effect throughout their local economy.
It's not just about numbers, it's about people.
It affects livelihoods and the overall economic health of their region.
Now, bring that biblical perspective back into the mix. The article looks at how ancient wisdom might actually guide our approach to these really complex trade discussions.
Okay, I'm interested to hear this.
So it brings up Proverbs 15.1.
Another proverb.
Yeah, it says, a soft answer turns away wrath.
So how might that apply to something like tariff negotiations?
Well, it suggests that, a more diplomatic and less confrontational approach could actually be really beneficial.
Instead of immediately resorting to aggressive tariffs or, inflammatory rhetoric.
When trade disputes arise.
Yeah, maybe a more measured and calm dialogue could lead to a more peaceful resolution.
Right. It's like in your own interactions, if someone comes at you aggressively, your natural reaction might be to get defensive.
Exactly.
And the same can be true for nations. A soft answer.
Or a more diplomatic approach.
Could actually de-escalate tensions and open the door for more productive conversations about trade imbalances or disagreements.
It makes sense.
And the article also references Matthew 5.9.
Okay.
Blessed are the peacemakers.
Bringing in the New Testament as well.
Applying that to the economic sphere. So how does prioritizing peace play out in something like trade relations?
Well, it suggests that the ultimate goal should be to foster these stable and mutually beneficial economic relationships.
Right.
Even when there are disagreements about trade practices or the fairness of certain tariffs.
Yeah, because those disagreements will happen.
Of course, but prioritizing the long-term health of the relationship and seeking those peaceful resolutions.
Rather than escalating conflicts through more and more tariffs.
Exactly. That could lead to better outcomes for everyone involved.
It's recognizing that both sides have a stake in a healthy trading relationship.
Exactly, and working towards solutions that don't damage that foundation.
So while there might be frustrations in trade talks, and the article acknowledges that the underlying aim should still be fairness and trying to build those economic bridges.
I like that.
Okay, so another crucial element that the article touches on is communication.
Okay.
How does clear communication play a role in avoiding trade friction?
Well, clear and effective communication is absolutely vital.
Why is that?
Well, misunderstandings or ambiguities in trade agreements or even in the way tariff changes are announced,
Right.
that can quickly lead to mistrust and escalate
Like a
tensions.
miscommunication can really snowball.
Exactly. The article uses this relatable example of a confusing email. If the instructions are unclear, it can lead to errors and frustration.
All the time.
Right. And the same principle applies to international trade.
Okay.
If the rules and expectations aren't clearly communicated, it just creates uncertainty and can lead to disputes.
Right. It's like trying to assemble furniture with instructions that are poorly translated.
Oh, yeah, you're just asking for trouble.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
clear language in trade agreements is key, but it's also about how the conversations happen, isn't it?
Absolutely. Open and respectful dialogue can go a long way in preventing misunderstandings.
If countries are communicating proactively and clearly about their concerns and intentions.
Yeah, it allows for potential issues to be addressed early on before they escalate into full-blown trade disputes involving tariffs.
Right. You catch it before it becomes a big problem.
Exactly. It fosters an environment of transparency and trust, which is essential for a stable and productive relationship.
The article then kind of shifts gears and talks about this idea of humility in economic decision-making.
Humility.
It brings in Proverbs 16:1. Pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall.
So how does humility or the lack thereof play out in the context of tariffs?
Well, it suggests that, a nation that believes it has all the answers
Right.
and acts unilaterally without considering the perspectives or potential impacts on its trading partners
Yeah,
might be setting itself up for negative consequences.
that makes sense.
Pride in this context could manifest as, a refusal to negotiate,
Okay.
a dismissal of legitimate concerns from other countries,
Right.
or an unwavering belief in the effectiveness of tariffs
Yeah.
without considering, potential downsides or alternative solutions.
Right. That kind of rigidity can lead to retaliatory tariffs and ultimately harm everyone involved.
So humility, on the other hand, would involve being willing to listen to work, consider different viewpoints, and to be flexible in negotiations.
Precisely, a more humble approach would involve seeking expert advice, being open to compromise, and recognizing that trade relationships are often a two-way street.
It's about understanding that your actions have consequences for others.
Exactly, and being willing to adjust your policies in a way that promotes mutual benefit rather than just prioritizing your own interests without regard for the impact on your trading partners.
Now, let's zero in on the Canadian perspective as presented in the article.
Okay.
What's the overall feeling north of the border when it comes to tariffs, particularly with the U.S.?
Well, the article paints a picture of a mix of concern and a desire for stability,
Okay.
given how much Canada's economy relies on trade with the United States.
Right. It's their biggest trading partner.
Exactly. Any hint of tariffs or changes in trade policy creates this degree of uncertainty.
Yeah.
The example of Alberta with its strong ties to the U.S. energy market really highlights this sensitivity.
Because they're so interconnected.
Right. And even something as seemingly small as a potential increase in the price of maple syrup
Maple syrup.
serves as this relatable illustration of how tariffs can affect everyday Canadians.
Right. It's not just about these abstract economic concepts.
Exactly.
It's about things that people experience in their daily lives.
Right. They're looking for a predictable and fair trading environment,
And the article touches on the unpredictability of tariff changes.
which must be nerve-wracking for Canadian businesses.
It must be so hard to plan when you don't know what the rules are going to be.
Exactly. The uncertainty surrounding when and where tariffs might be imposed makes it really difficult for them to plan and invest.
Because businesses thrive on stability.
They need predictable trade relationships, so their primary goal is to ensure fair access to the American market and to avoid those disruptions caused by unexpected tariff hikes.
I bet the conversations happening in coffee shops across Canada are reflecting these concerns.
I'm sure there are people talking about the potential impacts on their jobs.
The price of goods.
Exactly, their everyday lives.
The article also gives a brief overview of how the approach to U.S.-Canada trade, particularly regarding tariffs, differed between the Trump era and the current leadership.
Oh, yeah, that's an important distinction.
During the Trump administration, tariffs were used more frequently
Right.
as a tool in trade negotiations, often with the stated aim of protecting American industries and jobs.
The tariffs on steel and aluminum, for instance,
Right.
had a direct impact on Canadian businesses by increasing their costs for these essential materials.
Making it harder for them to compete.
Exactly.
And the article contrasts that with the current approach, which seems to be emphasizing more dialogue and a reduction in tariffs, with the goal of fostering a more stable and cooperative relationship.
It's a different philosophy.
Yeah, the current administration seems to be prioritizing communication and collaboration to resolve trade issues,
Working together.
aiming to create a more predictable and mutually beneficial environment for trade between the two countries.
It's a shift away from the more unilateral use of tariffs towards a focus on addressing shared economic challenges together.
Now, the article also brings up the importance of seeking counsel.
Seeking counsel.
It quotes Proverbs 11.14, where there is no counsel, people fall, but where there are many advisors, there is safety.
Okay, so how does this apply to something as complex as tariff policy?
Well, it underscores the idea that when making significant economic decisions, especially those with international implications, like tariffs, it's crucial to seek a wide range of expert advice.
Like, who are we talking about?
This could include economists, trade lawyers, industry representatives, even diplomats.
So a variety of perspectives.
Exactly, because relying solely on the perspective of a small group without considering diverse viewpoints can lead to flawed policies with unintended negative consequences.
It's like trying to navigate a complicated legal issue without talking to a lawyer.
Right, you might think you know what you're doing, but you could easily stumble into problems.
So seeking that broader counsel helps ensure more informed and well-rounded decision-making.
When it comes to tariffs?
Exactly. It reduces the risk of making impulsive decisions based on limited information or a narrow perspective.
Finally, the article looks at how communities respond to tariffs,
Okay.
noting that these policies have very real on-the-ground effects.
They do. Tariffs can lead to businesses having to adapt in all sorts of ways.
Some might find innovative solutions to overcome increased costs.
Like that bakery mentioned in the article.
Oh, yeah.
That started using avocado butter because of the higher dairy prices.
That's such a funny image.
A humorous example of necessity sparking creativity.
But the article also points out that, the emotional response in communities can vary quite a bit.
Of course.
From that kind of gallows humor to genuine anxiety about the future of local businesses.
And it's important to remember that not all businesses can adapt so readily.
Right.
For some, increased costs due to tariffs can lead to reduced profits.
Difficulty competing.
And in the worst cases, even closure.
So while we might hear about creative solutions, there's also this very real impact on people's livelihoods and the overall well-being of communities.
Absolutely.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it's clear that understanding tariffs between America and Canada is about so much more than just trade figures.
It's multifaceted.
It involves historical context, ethical considerations rooted in ancient wisdom, diplomatic approaches, and very real consequences for people and communities on both sides of the border.
It really is, and it leaves us with this final question for you. Considering these principles of fairness, justice, and the pursuit of peace that we've been discussing, how might these ideas inform not only international trade, but also your own approach to economic interactions and decision-making in your daily life?
It's something to think about.
Perhaps these ancient insights have a broader relevance than we might initially think.
Food for thought. And as always, this exploration has highlighted the importance of thoughtful discussion and considering multiple perspectives when we grapple with complex issues like international trade.
Sure.
Thanks for diving deep with us.
My pleasure.
Until next time.
See you later.
Bye.